And now on the line is Sheila Gilheany, the CEO of Alcohol Action Ireland. Welcome back to AirFM, Sheila.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Sheila, we can maybe talk about what has not been implemented yet with the Public Health Alcohol Act 2018 in a few minutes. But to start off, and the reason I got in touch with you to do this interview today is because yesterday, Wednesday, yourselves and Alcohol Action Ireland organised a public meeting. Can you give me and our listeners today on Near FM an overview of why you organised your meeting yesterday and what it was about, Sheila?
Surely indeed, Darren. Well, what we were actually looking at was the issue around alcohol treatment, and in particular, I suppose, the barriers that might be there around people actually being able to access treatment here in Ireland. So, the background really to that is that we know that there are very large numbers of people with an alcohol use disorder in the country. There's something of the order of just under 600,000 people, which is a huge number, 600,000 people with an alcohol use disorder. Now, that would range from a mild disorder up to severe. And from a severe point of view, something like about 90,000 people would have, a very, very significant and severe problem with alcohol. And yet, if you were to look at the numbers who actually access treatment, those numbers are very small in comparison. So in 2020, there was just about 3,300, just over that number, who actually for the first time gained access to treatment in Ireland. And so if you compare that number, with the very large number, now obviously not everybody is going to want to get treatment at any one time, but we would estimate that there's probably around 10% of people who have a problem might seek to get help, and yet that help can be difficult to access.
Okay. I've interviewed your colleague Ewan McKinney from Alcohol Action Ireland on Near FM loads of times over the last few years, Sheila, and I interviewed a couple of other people from your organisation a couple of times over the years also. This is only, I believe, our second interview on Near FM, Sheila, and our last one was almost exactly a year ago. And in that interview, we spoke about the same issue your public meeting was about yesterday, i.e., the lack of alcohol addiction treatment services in Ireland. So it would be fair to say, would it, Sheila, that there hasn't been a lot of change on this issue since we last spoke on Near FM a year ago, is there not?
Unfortunately, I think you're just correct there, Darren. Now, there are treatment services out there, and I certainly know for anyone who is listening to this, I don't want people to feel that there's nothing out there. There's actually very good services. And indeed, at our event yesterday, we had people from two sets of services, from Coolmine Therapeutic Community, and also from FAST, which is the Finglas addiction support team. So, and they talked about the services, and actually we would have also had a contribution from people who had experienced those services. And I have to say, there was a very, very uplifting actually to see when services are available, when people can access them, there can be transformational change that really, really can work. So unfortunately, though, what we want is to see more of that, and for the barriers around accessing treatment to be removed. And one of those particular barriers is, as well as needing to get timely access, sometimes people can feel, I suppose, the weight of kind of public opinion, if you like. There can be an awful lot of shame associated around having a dependency problem, which is just terrible. People can find themselves in situations, and very often we know that underlying addiction is often trauma. In fact, almost always there will be trauma, kind of, that's there, and that trauma can be anything. It can be, losing the loss of a parent at a young age. It can be growing up perhaps with alcohol issues in the home. It can be exposure to domestic violence, abuse. It can be a multitude of different traumas that can be there, and some that just aren't even, I suppose, necessarily easy to name at a particular time. But in the course of therapy, it can emerge. And we really do have to recognise that trauma is is a huge factor in all of this. So we're certainly very conscious of that. And one of the things that we call for is that, the types of treatment and the availability of treatment really does need to be trauma informed, that people have that understanding, of what can lead to an addiction problem.
And I think it's called the Health Research Board, issued a report recently as well. And one of the things they said is that one third of young people, this is people in their late teens, I believe, to early 20s, one third of young people in Ireland also have an alcohol use disorder, don't they?
That's absolutely right. I mean, it's actually 38%, so even more than a third. It's incredible, the numbers that are there. And actually, you see, one of the a particular factor in giving rise to a problem with alcohol is actually drinking at a young age. If you look at some of the statistics around that, you would see that people who would start to drink early, unfortunately, in itself, that is a risk factor for having a dependency problem at a later date. So that doesn't overly surprise me, because we do live in a country where that we have large numbers of our young people drinking. About 50,000 young people would start to drink every year, and certainly by the age of 18, you'd find that about 90% of our young people are drinking. Now, they don't all wake up on their 18th birthday and start to drink, so that that gives you a good indication, that of that early start to alcohol. And of course, that leads us back, into what are the things that could be put into place to help reduce that level of early drinking.
I only heard that term alcohol use disorder in the last year or so. I think is it a relatively new term? Do you know?
Language, it's one of those things that develops all the time, and it is relatively new just in the last few years. So that's been coming up. So there has been a move away from describing people as, being, say, an addict or an alcoholic, because people are so much more than just one thing. Somebody who has an alcohol problem, they're far, far more than just this term alcoholic, which is a difficult term for a lot of people. So there is that, I suppose, using a term like that is kind of like an acknowledgement that, everybody's an individual. They're coming with their own life path. They have a whole load of other, just all their characteristics, all their everything that is about them. And one element of that may be that they have an alcohol use disorder.
Hmm. One thing I think, well, at least when I was a teenager over 20 years ago, like a lot of I drank from when I was a young teenager, on an average of once a week for a few years. But a lot of people I knew at that age group kind of drank once a week, and they might have drank over the recommended limit, but it was generally just drinking once a week. I'd just be wary that I don't know about the statistics, but I'd be wary that like people who drink just once a week, they could drink a risky amount at that time period, but they'd also could be labelled kind of having alcohol use disorder. Is that likely to happen? Do you think?
Well, in sort of the diagnosis, I suppose, around an alcohol use disorder, there is a scale, and there is a kind of a question that's used, a thing called audit, AUDIT, and basically, I suppose, the way it is that people are asked about their drinking habits, and also about the impact of of the way they drink. So there's the questions would be things like has your drinking caused a problem, or has it caused a problem with relationships, or has it caused have you found that you can't stop drinking at any one time? So it's not about a single thing. It's really looks at I suppose a number of different factors, and then it kind of creates a score, if you like, from that, and from that you get this definition, if you like, of an alcohol use disorder. So it looks at both the amount that people drink, and then the way in which they drink, and then the impact that their drinking might be having on their lives.
Okay, we move on. A lot of the Public Health Alcohol Act 2018 has not come into operation yet. Can you tell me if you are happy with what has come into effect since 2018, Sheila, and then remind our listeners as to what else is supposed to come into effect in the future?
Surely indeed. So, the Alcohol Act is a whole suite of measures, and it tries to take a kind of I suppose, an in the round look at things. It's looking at the drivers of, alcohol use in society. So it has put forward a number of, I would say, relatively modest restrictions on pricing, on the availability of alcohol, and on the marketing of alcohol. So just starting with the advertising, first of all, what came into play, first of all, was restrictions on outdoor advertising, so that you shouldn't be able to see alcohol advertisements on public transport, bus stops, things like that, or within 200 metres of a school or a public amenity like playgrounds, things like that. So that would have come in back in 2019, at the end of 2019, November 2019. And there's been a number of other, important restrictions as well. So you might have seen things like, in supermarkets and shops, there's a designated area now for alcohol. And so alcohol has to be kept in a particular place and behind a barrier, not a terribly high barrier, I will say, but there is at least that demarcation. There's also some restrictions around promotions on alcohol. So you can't say, for example, get two for the price of one, that kind of thing, or you can't buy one product and get alcohol thrown in as a bargain or whatever alongside it. So there's those sorts of restrictions that are there. And then a big one that would have come in at the start of this year is minimum unit pricing. And that puts a floor level beneath which you can't sell alcohol. So basically, where we would have seen prior to MEP coming in, you could have got big slabs of beer, for example, at very, very cheap prices. Now, basically, they can't be sold beneath a certain level, which is an important thing.
I was watching the Ireland versus Ukraine football match last night, Sheila, and I noticed that for the first time that there was no advertising for alcohol companies around the pitch. I'm delighted to see this, and I believe this change is a result of the Public Health Alcohol Act, isn't it?
Well, one of the changes that came in, thanks for reminding me just about that as well. So another one of the measures is to do with, indeed, alcohol and sport. So what would have come in back in November of last year, 2021, is a restriction on the placement of alcohol advertisements on the pitch or the playing field, of a sport. So whereas previously you would have seen very large, like say during rugby things, you would have seen like the sponsor of some rugby matches. You would have seen a large kind of logo or whatever on the centre of the pitch. So that has been done away with. But I will say it's still fairly minimal. Like you can still get particular matches or particular championships being sponsored by an alcohol company and the name being very, very much associated with that. But I do agree there is a reduction, and it's definitely to be welcomed.
Mm.
Now
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I was just going to go on to that was the good news. That's the stuff that has actually come into play, and I was just going to outline some of the other stuff that hasn't yet actually come in.
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, so a big thing is around the content of alcohol advertisements and also the time at which you might see them. So talking just about the timing of that, the Alcohol Act allows for, or basically would provide for a broadcast watershed. So that would say that the children basically shouldn't see alcohol advertisements on TV or on radio at before a certain time, before 9 p.m. So we're still waiting for that to come in, and that's a very important thing. In terms of that driver for children starting to drink early, that's one thing that is very important. And then another one is around the content of alcohol advertisements. So the Alcohol Act makes provision for what you should be able to see in an Alcohol Act. It's kind of really trying to strip away, if you like, do you know, all the, I suppose, the selling of a myth that you would get in an alcohol advertisement, where you see like the lifestyle kind of a thing, lovely pictures, lovely environment, everything rosy when you have a glass of something, So it would actually strip back the alcohol advertisement to facts, where it's available, the price of it, where it was produced, things like that, So there's a whole set of restrictions around that we're still waiting to come into play. And then the other one is about the labelling of alcohol products. And this is more what I would say really a right to know. So it's things like, what's, the calories in a particular product, how much alcohol is actually there, but very importantly, a set of health warnings as well. So those warnings would be around things like, drinking in pregnancy, to avoid it, absolutely to avoid it. It's, there's huge danger to the developing child. And also a warning around cancer. And this is one that often surprises people because, a lot of people wouldn't, maybe just realize that alcohol, unfortunately, causes cancer. And we know that there's actually over 1,000 alcohol related cancer diagnoses every single year. So when this particular provision would come into place, there would be a warning label actually on an alcohol product when you would buy it that would say alcohol causes cancer.
I think there could be scope there maybe for increasing the range of warnings they have on the drinks. Do you think so?
Well, the particular act that I'm talking about there, provides for 3 warnings. So one is about pregnancy, one is about cancer, and the other is about a general health warning. So it includes things like liver problems that could come from there. But there is a multitude of warnings around that. So I think that, as I say, there's 3 main ones, and also then that basic information about the calories, the energy in the drink, and the amount of alcohol that's actually there as well. So these are all things that are very much a right to know. They wouldn't necessarily, people. But I suppose what I'm saying is, people, if you know something, at least then you can make up your mind, whether you want to buy that particular product or not.
Yeah, I won't keep it much longer, Sheila. You mentioned just a minute ago a health warning about for women not drinking alcohol when they're pregnant. I read it. I interviewed a few months ago the CEO of FASD Ireland. I believe they only set up about a year ago. But I looked at their website, and so I believe something like 80% of women in Ireland drink alcohol when they're pregnant. That sounds like an incredible figure to me, but is that actually true in your experience?
So unfortunately, Ireland does have a high level of drinking in pregnancy, and very often, just to put it in context, people often are drinking before they realise that they are actually pregnant. So there's a lot of people, for whatever reason, pregnancy isn't necessarily planned, and can be drinking simply before they actually know. But we do know that. Ireland is one of the highest levels of drinking alcohol in the world during pregnancy. And that really is a reflection of our society as a whole drinking a lot of alcohol. Because in fact, one of the predictors of drinking alcohol in pregnancy is that, there's a society-wide large amount of alcohol being drunk. So we know that's the case. We know that there are at least 600 Irish babies born every year with a thing called FAS, and then which is fetal alcohol syndrome. And then there's another one called FASD, which is kind of like a wider set of conditions, and there's maybe 10 times as many babies being born with it compared even with the FAS. So there's literally thousands of Irish people now living with that condition, which is something that isn't diagnosed very readily, and yet is definitely would have a very large impact on their lives, on their development, and I suppose their overall health.
Okay, we can talk maybe about that again in the future. It's great that there is an organisation now, FISD Ireland, working on these issues, isn't there?
We definitely feel that it is very important, and especially around FASD, there's such a need for better diagnosis and better services. And we can look to other countries who have really looking at this. Scotland, for example, has put in place, very, very good kind of diagnostics around it, but really it's the supports that are needed for those children and for their families, who could be dealing with things, and they just very often just don't really know why there are these problems. Some of them are neurodevelopmental, some of them are physical. There's a whole range of things that are out there, but we know that there are thousands of children in Ireland who are currently living with this condition.
Yeah, I'll come back to you again. We talk about it again. Just to come towards the end of the interview, Sheila, do we have any idea as to when the remaining parts of the Public Health Alcohol Act will be coming into operation?
Oh, well, I would love to be able to answer that question. We constantly are asking, our politicians, our ministers, about this, and we just don't have a clear answer on those particular things. What I really would say is that for people really to make change happen in Ireland, you need to contact your TDs. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, "Gosh, I wish I could do something about this," contact your TD. We actually, on our own website, alcoholireland.ie, you'll see a link there to how to contact your local TD, and with a message about these issues, and that might be something that some of your listeners might be interested in doing.